So, hey church, welcome back. So exciting to be here again for another preach in an empty building. So looking forward to when we're all back together again in a few weeks' time. But today I've got a message. I don't quite know what we're going to call it, but I think I'm starting a MasterChef series because last time I talked about yeast, and today we're going to be talking about mustard seeds. But before we get to the mustard seeds part, I just would like to reflect a little bit about, the last couple of days. I've been away on a bit of a break, and then while I was away, I actually watched the news. I know I've been keeping abreast of the news, but I actually watched a news bulletin. I don't know, it goes for 3/4 of an hour or something. And by the end of the news bulletin, I was sitting there thinking, what is going on in the world? And we could spend a lot of time and energy considering, speculating, discussing, trying to work out what's going on, what's happening, who's going where, who's right, who's wrong. But I think after having that experience watching an actual news bulletin, I realised that I need to take a step back, and I needed to go back and remind myself, what did Jesus tell us to do when we got into times like this? And with that in mind, I'd like to share a little bit out of Matthew chapter 24. Now, if you're familiar with the book of Matthew, you would know that Matthew chapter 24 is the chapter where Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple, and he tells us about the signs of the end of the age. Now, I'm not in any way making any intimations about this being the end of the world or anything like that, because I think Jesus has these things that have been going on for generations. Every generation has its crises. But I think that there is a really important message towards the sort of end of Matthew chapter 24, and I'd just like to read from verse 42. It says this: "Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." And I think the phrase in there is be ready. And then from verse 45, "Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is the servant whom his master, when he comes, will find him so doing." I think there's two messages there from Jesus. Number one is to be ready, and number two is to keep doing. Which of course leads me to that thought of, well, what is it that we should keep doing? And in thinking about that, I observed, or I noticed, that just before this passage where Jesus tells us to be ready and keep doing, one of the things in between the talk about the end of the age and the tribulation and these statements is in fact the parable of the fig tree. This parable of the fig tree, it's in Matthew 24, 32 and 33. It says, "Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors." And Jesus has set up here the sign of the fig tree. And thinking about the sign of the fig tree is that I realised that actually there is another story about a fig tree, which in fact only happens a couple of chapters before this. I'm going to read it out of Mark 11, and this one about the sign of the fig tree is in Mark 13. So just 2 chapters before that, in Mark 11, there is another story or another about the fig tree. In Mark 11, verse 12, it says this: "Now the next day, when they had come out from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing from afar a fig tree having leaves." Interestingly, here it is the exact same thing that Jesus is saying about this fig tree. In Mark 13 and Matthew 24, the thing he says about it is the fig tree has leaves. You know summer is coming. I don't think that's a mistake. He went out to see if perhaps he would find something on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And in response, Jesus said to it, "Let no one eat fruit from you ever again." So Matthew 24, where Jesus is establishing the sign of the fig tree, he's telling the disciples that having just had that experience with this fig tree with the leaves, that's the sign of the fig tree. And the thing that Jesus did to that fig tree was that he made a command to that fig tree. You see, we might look at the circumstances of this world and think that the world is going into chaos. But those signs, those leaves that we see, what Jesus is showing us here is that he doesn't want us to look at those and spend our time conjecturing about what it might mean. But Jesus, as Jesus did, he wants us to command the fig tree, to command the circumstances. That's what the sign of the fig tree is. It's not something to tell us to go and hide in a hole somewhere until it's all over, but it's a sign to point us in the direction of what God's calling us to do, which is to take command over these fig trees. Because we need to remember that whatever is going on around about us, it is God that is in control. It is God that counts our days and knows our beginning from our end. And what the circumstances that we see in the natural look like and what God sees in the spirit are two very different things. If we are looking in the natural, we will see in the natural. And in the natural, we will be looking somewhere for some sort of help, whence it might come. Maybe the government, maybe the this, maybe the that. But the reality is there is no hope in this world apart from the hope that is in Jesus Christ. The church has those seeds of hope. And now is the season for us to take those things and to shed them abroad in this world and in our community. If you're looking in the Spirit, then you will see where our help is going to come from. And I'm really encouraged. I've been reading Psalms 121, which starts with that very thought. It says, "I will lift up my eyes to the hills. From whence comes my help? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in from this time and even forevermore." I believe now is a time for us as a church to lift up our eyes, because there is one place that our help is going to come, and that is from God. And this is not just something for us, but this is for the whole world. This is for every situation and circumstance that people are facing in these times when everything looks like it's gone crazy. And then the other thing that I've been reflecting out of Matthew chapter 24, where we think about this fig tree and Jesus commanding the fig tree, is that also connects back to another story a few chapters back in Matthew 17. So Jesus said to them, "Because of your unbelief, for assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." Jesus says in Matthew 24 that we need to keep doing. I believe that those things that he's calling us to keep doing are the basics, the things that set the foundation of our Christianity. And I believe that Mark 11 and Matthew 17 give us a very good window into what those things are. I'm going to read again in Mark 11. And this is connected because this is where they came back to that fig tree. So in verse 12, Jesus cursed the fig tree, and this is what happens when they come back to that fig tree. It says, "Now in the morning as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, remembering, said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered away. I think that's a great promise, that those things that Jesus commanded, they withered away. So Jesus answered and said to them, have faith in God. For assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. Therefore I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you will have them. And whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. I think there are three things here. Number one, Jesus says, have faith in God. Number two, he says, ask when you pray. He says to pray. And number three, he says, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him. Three things: faith, prayer, and forgiveness. When we look at what's happening in our world, how far would we get if every Christian got themselves back to those three basics: faith, prayer, and forgiveness? The scripture I read before in Matthew 17 actually adds a fourth one to that, a fourth one being actually fasting. And if you think about, us here at Networks Church, when you think about the foundations that are established in this church, these are the things that are in our foundations: faith, prayer, forgiveness, and fasting. And I think the other thing that I'm struck here is that there is also here this concept about the moving of mountains, because if we ever need mountains being moved, now would be the time. And in Matthew 17 it says, if you have faith like a mustard seed, and of course this is where I'm getting to the master chefy bit, because mustard seeds are really interesting. One of the things I've typically heard when people talk about mustard seeds, they talk about the fact that a mustard seed, if you've seen them, they're very small and they make a very big tree. Because what's interesting is that while that's a nice, interesting thing, that this is technically, it's almost like the biggest difference in any plant in terms of the size of the seed to the size of the tree. It's one of the biggest, most dramatic changes. And that's true that mustard seeds do grow very big bushes, but also it grows very ugly ones. Nobody's going to put that in their front garden just for, decorative purposes. That's not the point. I think what we need to remember is that the mustard seed is not really to grow some nice tree in your backyard, nice big one. It's not about that. It's not about growing a nice tree in your backyard. Actually, mustard seeds are about flavour. The point of the mustard seed is to give flavour to your food, flavour to your life. That's the point of the mustard seeds. And I've got three quick reflections about flavour, mustard seeds, and how that connects to faith. The first one is this, that the flavour in the mustard seed only comes out under pressure. So if you've got mustard seeds, you can't get any flavour out of them unless you do one of two things. Either you have to crush it or you have to burn it. So you either crush it to get the flavour out, or you put it in a very hot pan and you basically burn it till it pops. That's the only two ways that you can get the flavour out. In fact, if you do both at the same time, crush and make them hot, you get really good flavour. And I think that's really interesting, because when it comes to our faith in James chapter 1, the Bible tells us that our faith comes out of pressure. It says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. You see, faith comes out under pressure. Flavour comes out under pressure. And we're in a perfect position for our faith to be brought out. What are we allowing to be brought out of our lives? Are we coming out in faith or are we coming out in fear? Because it's the flavour of the faith that's in the mustard seed that the world needs right now. Second thing is this. One mustard seed does not make for very much flavour. The average recipe that I make that uses mustard seeds, you need at least a tablespoon. Now, I have no idea. I've never counted it, but that's several hundred, if not maybe 1,000, I don't know, several hundred at least, mustard seeds. Maybe one day I should sit down and count a tablespoon so then I know exactly how many there are in there. Maybe I'll do that and let you know later. But you see, one mustard seed by themselves is not very useful. You need a whole bunch of them. And this is one of those things that we hear as networks, we talk about we're better together. And the reality is that our faith works like a mustard seed. If it's working like a mustard seed, then our faith needs to come together with the faith of others. We need to bring our faith together, and as collectively as a church, we need to stand in faith. We need to stand up and speak that faith into our community. We need to bring that confidence into our community. We need to bring that help that comes from God to our community, because it's not going to come from anywhere else. It comes through the church. It comes through us. That's the way that God designed it. And then the third thing that I've noticed about mustard seeds is that when you put them in your dinner, whatever it is you're making, there is a very unmistakable mustard aroma. If you're not sure what that is, then the next time you go to the supermarket, buy yourself a jar of hot English mustard, take the lid off and have a big whiff. It will hit you like a ton of bricks. In fact, it'll probably make you sneeze, a bit like pepper, because there is an unforgettable aroma that comes from those mustard seeds. When you crush them and then you put them in a pan and you just heat them up a bit, that aroma will fill your kitchen. That aroma will go into the entire dish. There's an aroma about faith that is unforgettable and unmistakable. It is in your face, almost. And I think that's one of the things that's important to remember, is that we, as the church, carry an aroma. It's like, what's the opposite of faith? A lot of people think the opposite of faith is doubt. But doubt's not the opposite of faith. The opposite of faith is fear. And I don't know if you've noticed, but we also think about fear as having a scent. You know how you talk about you can smell the fear. And what we need right now in this community, in this world, is we need the smell of faith. The faith that says that there is a God, and that God knows our troubles. He knows our concerns, and he has a plan for our good, a plan for a hope and a future. We need to cultivate the confidence that comes from when we remember who God is that we serve. And so today I'd like to encourage us as a church, because we are the church of God. And while we might think about the fact, and we might, that many people don't or won't, come inside the church. They might be skeptical about the church. They might not really necessarily think that we've got anything to say or anything to do. But when we have an aroma of faith that says that we are confident, no matter the circumstances of life, we can look to God and we can know from whence our help comes. That we can look to God and we can say, as Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego did, that we are confident that our God is able. But even if he doesn't, we won't bow the knee. When we have that sort of confidence, that's an aroma of confidence that we can take to the world. And I think that's the thing that will change the world, because that's the hope that we have. And I really encourage you, because at the moment everything looks so enormous. But the reality is that while the problems are huge, and while there are many things and many people in crisis all over this world, God hasn't called us in order to deal with all the thousands of people out there. But actually God's called us to the one. Just a final scripture. I'm going to turn to Matthew. Matthew chapter 18. There is a parable. It's called the parable of the lost sheep. And it says, "Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost." And this is the part that I want to reflect on. What do you think? if a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to seek the one that is straying? You see, we have together a confidence, a faith that we can cultivate with each other. But the purpose of that is to bring the aroma of God, the scent of God, the confidence that God is for us and not against us to the world. But in bringing it to the world, it's not as if we can bring it to everybody. I believe God's asked us to bring it to the one that is our neighbour, that one person who's looking to you to see what God says, that one person who's looking to you, who needs to be able to see the confidence that comes from your faith in God, who needs to be able to see not the fear of the world, but the confidence of faith that God is here and that God is working and that God is doing in our world today. So I just encourage you that God wants us to take that confidence. Let's not bring fear to this world, but let's bring faith. Faith that we get from the Word, from our encouragement with each other, and bring that to the world, to the one that we meet today, tomorrow, the next day, at work, in the community. Thanks.